Good day, good evening, wherever you're joining us from. And welcome again to African News Review. And my name is Adesoji Iginla. Welcome to Adesoji Speaks. As always, I have important guest with me. The man is a man of many parts, many skill sets. He's the publisher of Black Star News. He is a social commentator, a history major, and when he's not busy with his day chores, he goes around exploring and renaming things. He is none other than brother, comrade Milton Allimadi.
Thank you, Milton. As always, Ndogo. Thank you so much for hosting me again.
Okay. Yes. Again, welcome to the channel. Here we do a review of African news or news pertaining to Africans both on the continent and the diaspora in the Western media. We're giving it a look based on the fact that we know they would not be true to the nature of their storytelling. So it's incumbent on us to help reframe the narrative and gain a better understanding of what it is the press has in store for us. So that without further ado, I would take us to the first story. The audience will be aware that in the course of the week, there was a coup d'etat. Oh, well, it's not really a coup d'etat, but it's a coup d'etat as the press would announce it. And so, Brother Milton.
Yes.
What is your initial assessment of when you heard the coup happening in Congo?
I didn't take it seriously. I didn't think the Congolese took it seriously. Yeah, because the Congo's only serious threat right now comes from the war of aggression from Rwanda.
From the M23.
Right,
yep.
East 23, Eastern Congo.
Yeah.
Where, the city of Goma is besieged, literally. But in my own estimation, I don't think the African Union, or the UN, and, obviously, it's sad that the United States has so much influence. I don't think the United States would also allow Kagame, Rwanda's president, Paul Kagame,
yep,
to succeed in taking Goma, holding Goma, and disrupting production. The only reason why the U.S. has not dealt much more decisively in trying to corral or tame its puppet in Rwanda, Paul Kagame,
yeah,
because much of the production of cobalt is in the southeastern part of the country.
Okay.
Kolwezi, toward what used to be called the Katanga region.
The Katanga region, yeah.
Going into parts of Tanzania, going to parts of Zambia. So that's why the U.S. has not been that serious. But to understand how unserious the so-called coup attempt was, first of all, in order to try coup d'etat, you have to have following within elements of the military itself.
True.
Or be a part of the military. This is a guy who has dabbled in politics in Congo, Malanga, and then at some point moved to the United States, has lived here for a long time, and has a party which flies the old flag of Zaire. That's the flag that he recognizes, and he wants to take the country back to the era of Zaire.
1974.
So this guy, I don't know whether he just woke up from comatose last week and has been sleeping since 1997 when Mobutu was overthrown.
And the name
So I
reverted
don't even
back
know
to
the details, but there's a video they shot on the grounds of the presidential palace. Maybe, I don't know if that's the residence where the President Tshisekedi
that was
also
the
lived.
opposition leader's space.
Okay, very good. So they shot that video, and they streamed it live. What kind of coup attempt is that? How unserious could they be? So not surprisingly, he was killed, Malanga, and his associates captured, including his son, some American citizens, apparently, some Israeli citizens. But it did not seem like a well-trained, serious force. And also, the statement by the United States shows you how there's a much more serious story that appeared last week that will explain how vested the United States is in the current Congolese government of Felix Tshisekedi. It was a story in the New York Times. I think it was on the 16th. And it's about how the Biden administration is trying to ease sanctions on an Israeli billionaire, Dan Gottlieb, who had bribed Congolese officials when Kabila was president, Joseph Kabila, and had cheated Congolese out of $1 billion in royalties from their mining production.
Ooh.
And the U.S., ironically, under Trump, imposed sanctions on Iginla. But now the Biden administration is
seeking to lift
offering a deal to remove the sanctions on this Israeli individual. And that article said President Tshisekedi also wrote to the U.S. administration asking for the sanctions against Iginla to be lifted for a number of reasons. Number one, they say so long as that, and obviously I think the U.S. probably told him to write the letter, so long as the sanctions are still on Iginla, he is unwilling to yield his equity stake in 3 major Congolese cobalt and copper mining companies. They produce in Congo, but they're not Congolese owned, actually. 2 of them owned by Glencore, the notorious firm based in Switzerland.
Yeah.
One is owned, check this, by the government of Kazakhstan, although I don't know who the shareholders are, right? So, in return for lifting the sanctions, and why do they want the sanctions lifted? They say so long as there are sanctions being imposed, other investors from the United States are reluctant to invest in the cobalt and copper industry in Congo. So they would lift the sanctions and they would allow him to cash out, to sell his equity stake.
To whom?
That's not said yet. But human rights officials are saying, why should he be allowed to cash out if he was bribing Congolese officials? And these are ill-gotten gains. Why should he profit even more?
True.
And even though the sanctions have been imposed since the Trump era, he's still been allowed to be paid royalties from his equity stake.
Mining operations.
And it comes to $110 million a year. So I don't know what kind of sanctions these are. I guess the sanctions mean he gets 110 million instead of getting maybe 500 million or $1 billion a year, right?
Wow.
But the fact that the Biden administration is working together with Tshisekedi for this kind of a deal, in other words, to aid and abet corruption in Congo. Shows you how vested they are in this administration. They're not going to allow somebody called Malanga
to come in and
disrupt what's going on. Yeah, so that's why if people know the other elements of what's going on, they would see how unserious this story is.
Wow.
And obviously, when you just read the headline on CNN, you don't get that perspective. The New York Times, of course, knew it's not a very serious story because they did the other story about the cobalt and copper that I just explained.
Yeah. I mean, the thing about also the Western media is most of our news stories are carefully curated, giving you enough of nothing.
Absolutely.
For you, just to fill the headlines, a couple of lines. Even reading through some of the story, some of the long reads, there's still nothing in there, because if you're not versed with what has gone before,
correct,
you're likely to come away from it thinking, oh, it's just a normal run-of-the-mill African stories where, one corrupt dictator is just there and he's not been able to get his cuts. That's why somebody else came in. I mean, the notion that a couple of weekend soldiers will come in from the United States wanting to play with toy guns, and obviously, in the United States, you shoot at stable targets, and all of a sudden you think you can handle a gun, and then you get onto the African scene.
Yeah, and his planning was he lived in the U.S. for a while,
mm-hmm.
and then I don't know what year it was. He went back to the Congo and joined the military in the Congo for about a year. So I think he was just practicing for his fantasy this past weekend.
But well, he got his wish fulfilled. So
yes,
I mean, he went out in a blaze of glory.
Absolutely. If that's what he had imagined, he really did get it. Yeah. But talk about corporate media. I generally read very few. I read The Guardian.
Okay.
And I read Al Jazeera. The others, I look at the headlines. If it's an in-depth report, like the New York Times story, on this deal to lift the sanctions off Ghana, I would read that because it would have a lot of details, and even if some of the interpretation are incorrect, you can make your own analysis.
Yeah.
Right.
So what you're saying is you disregard your friends at NYT.
No, actually, I've always, as you know, a couple of years ago, when I had more time, I used to do a weekly workshop called Guerrilla Journalism. And I used to go to Bed-Stuy. It's very interesting. You'd be surprised at how many people want to deconstruct and analyze and understand the propaganda. There was you remember Gil Noble with his show Like It Is. So I used to be a regular guest on Like It Is. And then one day I said, Gil, I like to give back to people at the grassroots. And I put this out as a challenge to all of us, Africana people, whatever profession you are in, give something back. So what I would like to do is to go to the community and teach some of the journalistic skills I've acquired, including how to deconstruct what corporate media say. And then I get a call from a brother like the following week. And says, listen, I have a little bookstore. It's a very interesting brother. For such a number of hours, the space was a bookstore.
Okay.
And then in the evening, for a certain number of hours, it was a barber shop, right? So he said,
a proper guerrilla scenario.
Perfect. He said, so would you be willing to come and start this program that you discussed on Gil Noble's show? I said, sure. He said, how about maybe 10 days from now? Let me put out some flyers and promote it. I said, sure. So I come there. The first time I walk in, so I said, wait, who are all these people here for? And the brother comes to me and said, they're all here for you, brother. There were more than 40 people.
Oh my God.
Waiting for this workshop, man. And that's how serious people are to really learn. And I did this workshop for like 4 years. And then, I trained some of them. I said, now you can continue the process. But I understand that a few of them are becoming lazy. So I may have to revive it.
We now have a virtual platform. You could...
Absolutely. In those days, it was physical. You had to pick yourself up and go to Bed-Stuy, which I wouldn't mind doing occasionally. You could mix it up a little bit. Sometimes it's good too.
Physical locations.
But now you're correct. With the virtual space, you can have a wider reach now.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the more you, what's it called? The more you advertise it, the more it grows.
Right.
And then...
And there's a need for it. Believe me, there's a need for it.
Yeah. A lot.
People know they're being duped, but sometimes they're not equipped to deconstruct the duping.
And then they go down the line of conspiracy theories, which is then defeats the aim of, getting the full understanding in itself.
You become just like them, right?
Yeah. So, again, in the same week, Senegal's Prime Minister Ousmane Sonko made a statement. Statement being that it's high time that the Senegalese revisit the notion of having French military bases on Senegalese soil. I mean, that will be in tandem with his Sahel neighbors of Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, and Guinea. But what is particularly interesting about his situation is the fact that Senegal actually has the oldest French military base in Africa, in a place called Tiroroué. And so the notion that he is now talking to them directly to come and move is truly groundbreaking. And so what are your thoughts with regards to this?
I mean, the timing is perfect, of course. But, they've been talking about this even over the last couple of years before they ultimately ran for power, and they won. Of course, the Prime Minister, Ousmane, had he not been barred, Ousmane Sonko, he would be
the president
today.
Yeah.
So it was what his supporters say was a concocted legal case against him, which then led to his being barred from running for the presidency and being imprisoned. And his ally as well, Faye, who of course is the president today, was also locked up in prison.
Yeah. But
since Faye was not banned from running, when the elections were allowed, elections that Macky Sall had tried to block and extend, but the Senegalese are very well organized when it comes to civil society, and the institutions are still respected, and the elders, religious leaders are respected.
Yep.
So they denounced President Macky Sall, and he backed down and allowed the elections. They were delayed, but they were not indefinitely postponed as he had wanted to do. Most likely, he was probably being encouraged by the French in the background, because the French could read the writing on the wall that the youth, led by people like Sonko and Faye, they really want to remove the French neocolonial imperial influence in Senegal, as is already occurring in other West African countries, in addition to the issue of the troops, which, by the way, is not very substantial, but still, of course, very influential I think there are about 350 soldiers, but even that is one too many.
One too many, of course.
In addition to that, they've also said they want to have their own national currency. They do not want to any longer be a part of the CFA franc, which of course is linked to the French economy and to the French currency. To me, what I find most interesting here is that now we have this kind of agenda to remove neocolonial French imperialism.
Yep.
Very aggressively being pursued in Mali, and then Burkina Faso, and then Niger. Some countries like Guinea, I don't think they can sit on the fence. There's going to be pressure on them to be more aggressive. Countries like Gabon, if there was a caretaker coup, I'm sure the younger generation are bubbling there. So we could see more transition there. And then, of course, another area which really needs to be shaken up is Cameroon.
Oh.
Yes, Cameroon, where you have this 90-year-old plus Paul Biya, who lives in
Switzerland
penthouse, hotel, VIP penthouse, and runs his country from there. Yeah, that's a country that definitely
you sound very jealous.
Absolutely. Yeah, but he can keep that hotel room. Provided he never comes back. I'm fine with that. You see. So what they're doing in Senegal is just following the trend of what's happening in West Africa and happening in other parts of Africa in a different way. In Southern Africa, you have the youth, young people with Julius Malema.
Yep.
In South Africa. In Uganda, you have, of course, Bobi Wine against the autocracy of General Museveni. And I think increasingly that's what we'll see in Africa.
I mean, chiming with what you're saying, also in Gabon, where there was a similar style coup as to what transpired in Niger, although the French didn't call that one a coup, but we all know why, because it was a case of musical chairs. Omar Bongo was beginning to dally with the Americans, and it was becoming too, too close to the bone, because were they to lose Gabon with its gas and oil reserves, manganese, and also uranium, then it would have been a much more severe blow to their hegemony in.
Right, but they'll lose it anyway. There's nothing
of
they
course,
can stop right now. It's like, putting your finger in a leaking dam, so to speak. Yeah, it's too late. We're going to see some more changes over the next, 12 months.
Yeah, so
months, the next year or two.
And also, again, it goes back to what you were talking about earlier with regards to the guerrilla journalism. The notion now is you need people on the ground who are aware of what the story is, have a historical background to set story, and write long form instead of piecemeal. Because the thing about piecemeal is, once you throw out the story and people don't really have an understanding of the underlying reason for what they're witnessing, they get disillusioned, So, I mean, it would be interesting to write, one long essay about the spate of coups between 1960 and 2023. And you will find a common thread through all of them. If it's not internal, most of them are not even internal politics. Most of them have been pushed from the outside, which is why you had that joke of a coup d'etat in Congo, the DRC, because that was how it used to be when you had mercenaries coming from, you remember the guy, what's his name? Mad Dog O'Hare.
Bob Bernard, yeah.
Bob Bernard, that's another mercenary. So those two, I mean, in the history of coups in Africa, were so,
That's why I
notorious.
told you this guy was sleeping, because he thought you could still do that type of thing, where you come with 10 people, a few Europeans, and then, that's it.
Yeah. I mean, so I think it's high time that the narrative is told properly by not just the people on the ground, but people with a true vested interest. A couple of guys are doing what we're doing, but then we still need more hands because we're going up against corporate media, and corporate media have deep pockets,
Right, and they want to maintain the status quo.
Of course.
When they call it, and the New York Times refers to the coup belt.
What does that mean?
What does that really mean?
Yeah.
And sadly, many of our local media also adopt the language without understanding what is being said and the reason why it's being said and the purpose behind it.
Yeah.
You've read, some years ago, a Ugandan journalist was writing about a court case, and then he wrote about how, when the suspect stepped into the court, and he's trying to emulate some of these corporate Western media,
being melodramatic.
Walked in, his mood seemed sullen, and he suddenly darkened. Oh my God. I'm like, oh, my brother, you've been reading
too many David Copperfields and Charles Dickens. Well, I mean, there's no need for dramatics when news is involved. It's just the typical 5 questions. What, why, who, why, how, and and just keep it moving.
Sadly, many of the people who educate our people are also themselves miseducated. So, for example, if you go to what is supposedly the so-called one of the best journalism schools in the U.S., and you go to Columbia, and they're still taught about objectivity, right? What is objectivity? And we discussed this the other day. There's no such thing. It's complete nonsense, right? The objectivity is not the same thing to a European American. It's not the same thing to an African American. It's not the same thing to an Asian American. It's just not. Right? I think you should strive to teach people to be as fair as possible.
Yeah.
Be fair.
And be true to the facts.
Absolutely. And also when it comes to balance, I really wonder about that. If there's a notorious thief or bandit, and the evidence is very clear, what is the importance of balance in a case like that? Giving the bandit equal time as well?
Yeah.
I very much doubt there's any utility in that. So that's why it's actually very important what we do.
Yeah.
Because the choice is almost in your hands. Plus, of course, once they get to the editors,
before they chop
the
it up.
editors, of course, those are the tyrants of journalism. But what you feed them also is important. And what you feed them, a lot of it is reflective of your own persona.
And values system.
Values. Absolutely.
Yeah. Because what you have is, the next story, one of the stories we're going to delve into touches on that, is also the notion that what is a good story? And who are we reporting to? Sometimes the audience also, which is where history comes into play. What's the narrative we want to maintain? And then you have the stories put before us. Sometimes we're reading stories that are not meant for us, but we think they are, because the headlines alone tells you, you know, you said the guy is reading out a script about what he is witnessing, but he clearly not talking to his people. He's talking to a foreign audience. And if he's not cut a check, he might not be there next week. So he plays to the gallery. He continues that performance, which then defeats the point of journalism in itself, which is be true to the story, be true to the facts, and just put everything in front of people and let them decide, obviously within reason, without going down the rabbit hole.
Absolutely. And I think, to be honest with you, many of my colleagues that I went to journalism school with, I'm in touch with only a handful. And those are the ones who have a broader perspective on life in general, on issues. They have an interest beyond just, journalism per se. Because what is journalism after all? If it does not combine history, if it does not combine some political orientation,
yep,
if it does not combine some issue of equity, economic justice, right? If these things are of no concern to you, what type of journalist are you really? You see?
Corporate media.
Well put. Exactly. And that's the problem. And they call the others as alternative media.
Media, yeah. I mean, that's the irony.
What a scam.
That's the irony. Projection is a is a real thing. Projection.
Yep, and it's so real that even the others start referring to themselves as alternative
media. I mean, it's again,
like my students, when every semester somebody's going to bring it up, and I put them to task. I think I told you this a couple of weeks ago in a different context. When they start talking about third world, I said, thank you for bringing it up. Now explain to us what third world means.
Oops.
Because then they realize the things that come to their mind are things that are uncomfortable to say. Right?
No critical thinking.
Only when put to tasks like that, then they start understanding and analyzing that word.
Yeah, third world.
You may have, so somebody explain to us what this third world means. So in a class of 25, you may have 10 students with their hands up, and then you select one. Okay, so where are they found, these third world countries? Well, Africa. Okay, so they're not found in Europe. No, not really. Why are they found in Africa? What characteristics? Well, they're poor. Like, okay, are they poor or are they impoverished?
Impoverished, yeah.
You realize the difference. You have the gold, the diamond, the oil, and everything, and yet you're
poor,
quote unquote poor. Does that make sense? Or is something happening? Who's benefiting then? Then you see the hands start going down. Before they were 10, you see the hands one by one dropping. Because now every one of them is also thinking as the person I'm engaged with. Yeah.
I mean, it's that's the role of journalism anyway. It's what's it called again? The first draft of history. But it's only true if there's an element of sincerity there, which is be true to the story, be true to the value system. So which actually, in terms of being true to our value system, we go to the next story, which involves Kenya has been in this back and forth. Kenyan lawyers, to be exact, have been this back and forth with the government of William Ruto. William Ruto has promised, by extension, the UN, by extension, the United States,
Right.
that he will be providing them with 1,000 policemen to perform peacekeeping duties in Haiti.
Correct.
So the issue now is the lawyers are thinking these policemen are not that they're not fit for purpose, but they see a double meaning in what they're being asked to do, which is they're being asked to hold the water for the imperialists. And the lawyers have challenged the issue. The court initially said an issue of reciprocity must be produced, which is you have to show how not only does it benefit Haiti, but how does it benefit the Kenyan police force. Ruto circumvented the idea and went ahead and gave what would be considered a performative undertaking that they'd been done in the interest of professionalism, and the Kenyan troops, the Kenyan police will be able to gain something. But these lawyers are not particularly pleased. And so they've gone back to court, and now they're challenging the, what's it called? They're challenging the move again. And so it says, the news coming from Reuters says, Kenyan lawyers have moved to block the country's planned deployment of police to Haiti, a court filing showed. Days before the officers were expected to arrive in the Caribbean nation to tackle spiraling violence there. The court ordered the lawsuit be served to stop government officials and the case be heard on June 12 in a statement. Now, here's the part that stood out to me. Responding to Haiti's appeal for assistance. Can you speak more to that? When did Haiti make this appeal?
Well, Haiti did make the appeal, but
Okay.
But who is Haiti? You know,
Good question.
Haiti until March was Ariel Henry,
yeah,
who is an unelected prime minister. Correct?
Yeah, correct.
So he was seen as Haiti by the Western establishment. And he did make the appeal, possibly from instruction from the U.S., since, it was because of U.S. indulgence that he was remaining in office without a mandate as prime minister. So, but so it's true that in order for Kenya to agree to deploy, there had to be in place, and as you said, a reciprocal agreement signed between the leaders of the two countries.
Yep, Haiti and Kenya.
So since that did not exist, one of the lawyers' name is Okot. I remember we had a conversation with him a few months ago. And so they were able to block the initial attempt at deployment because no such agreement existed. So what President Ruto did was to go around and invite Henry to Kenya, and they signed the reciprocal agreement. Obviously, to get rid of the court issue. Otherwise, would you not normally sign such an agreement first before agreeing to deploy?
True.
Right. So that had never crossed their mind initially. So they did it in response to the court matter which had blocked deployment. But there's another problem, and the story does not mention it. And that is also another example of this shoddy corporate media reporting. But my understanding is that both leaders have to be legitimately elected. So, number one, Henri was not elected by anybody. So, number two, Henri was not the legitimate prime minister of Haiti. So, it's possible that the court will find that the agreement is not legitimate. And of course, soon after signing the agreement, Henri was not able to go back home to Haiti.
So technically,
barbecue and his
cohorts.
Yeah, they blocked his return. They seized control of the airport, and Henri had to resign. So the two last official acts he did was to sign that agreement with Ruto, and the second one was to resign as prime minister. So this is on paper the way things look right now. And I think that's what's going to be heard on June the 12th. However, as you know, Ruto will be in the White House tomorrow.
On
official state visit.
Big boys.
And I think since Biden came into office, this would be maybe only the 6th or 7th official visit by head of state, right?
Okay.
Not just passing by and then coming to greet, but this is an official where there'll be an official state dinner. All the carpets are rolled out, with powerful business interests invited and all that.
Okay.
So it's what they call a firm handshake. And that is tomorrow. So it seems to me
Kenya
it's going to be very difficult for Ruto and the U.S. not to get their way, either before June the 12th or on June the 12th. And what are some of the ways you can get your way? The old-fashioned system, money. There's going to be a lot of money floating around. So right now, the money could be floating around to the extent
it's not being targeted at the moment.
That the Kenyan legislature could be encouraged to intervene. Money could be floating around that members of the court may not stand firmly together. Okay?
Yeah.
Because this is very high stakes. Ruto cannot come all the way.
That's his reputation. That's his reputation, yeah.
Right? His reputation, the reputation, not so much his, but of the United States, on the line. So I see some interesting things that may happen that may still allow the deployment to proceed. Or they may say Ruto and the transitional council, which is now in place in Haiti, may sign another agreement to circumvent that thing. So the court on June 12 may say Henri was not legitimate, but since the transitional council is recognized as the legitimate authority now in Haiti, if the government of Kenya signs another agreement with the transitional authority, then the deployment can proceed. So there are a number of things that can happen. And that could also be said as a result of a lot of money floating around. And I hate to put it that way. I'm not suggesting at all that our judges, our officials are corrupt, but I'm suggesting that a lot of money is going to be offered. Okay?
So people will be changing their holiday locations this year?
Yes.
If they're used to holidaying in Zanzibar, they probably would up the stakes and go to Maldives.
On the other hand, the judges may shock us and say, nope.
Nope. Yeah, that's true.
Sticking by the letter of the law, the commas, the periods, the crosses. He signed an agreement with an illegitimate authority. Even the transitional council was not elected by the people of Haiti. So an agreement with them would also be illegitimate. The court could also take that stance. And I would be really impressed. But if they don't take that stance, I would not be shocked either.
Okay, so it will be in line with what general expectation is.
Right.
I mean,
because Ruto and the U.S. might find a way to tell the court through public statements, could be, public statements made to media, so that you don't look like you're interfering with the work of judiciary. But you would make sure these are statements that, of course, they're going to be reading, promising, $2-3 billion investment in Kenya, this and that and that. So now you put the judges in a position
where they're going against the public
to look at them and say, "Wait a minute, are you guys serious?
look at this load of cash here.
Are you trying to block our piece of the pie?" So there are many ways to put pressure on them.
Okay. And speaking of putting pressure, apparently the press has not been able to do its work satisfactorily, according to the Western media. They seem to believe that the Coup belt, as they refer to it, Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger Republic, have been sort of black spots for them in terms of news. And suffice to say, they issued, or rather wrote, this very long, lengthy statement in the course of the week, which is, I'll share. It's, the military regimes have turned the Sahel into a black hole of information. In the Central Sahel, and this is on the World Press Freedom Day, there's a whole, raft of problems with that. In the Central Sahel, journalists, reporters have seen their working conditions deteriorate since they were taken over by military hunters, international organizations, marking World Press have found, okay? And Mali, France has turned into information deserts, Observer warned, following the suspension and closures of dozen media outlets, including Radio France International, France 24 over the past 3 years. The expulsion and non-issuance of visas or accreditation to foreign journalists, especially French journalists, is seen as a sign of determination of these regimes to rid themselves from a free press deemed incompatible with their principles. Over to you.
Well, I mean, obviously this story is very self-serving, but that's not to say that we don't have a major crisis in terms of the risk that our colleagues in journalism face.
Of course.
Not just, in the Sahel zone, but throughout Africa, really. In Rwanda, for example, many journalists, are kidnapped, killed. In Uganda, the same thing, particularly during the last election.
And Cameroon.
Absolutely. So for them to isolate it as something that's not happening because the military in charge, that's pure propaganda. And that's the sad thing about it. They take an issue which is very serious that needs much more attention on a regular basis and try to use it as cover just because they themselves are annoyed that, French media are being kicked out of the region, just like French military, French officials are being kicked out. So that's their beef, their personal beef. And now they use this as an excuse, as another example of the kind of excesses that we see the military engaged in, as if the civilian government was any better, you know. And then there's a reference in the story that I think it's 5 journalists have been killed, half a dozen or so, you know, kidnapped and all that since 2013. And, you know, and they're hoping that many readers won't catch that. Since 2013, well, the military coups have just started in 2020. You see? See, another one of their tricks, you see? But as I said from the onset, this is not to diminish the deplorable conditions under which our colleagues in this profession have to operate to bring the stories, and that shows their level of dedication. Knowing the likelihood of being arrested, being beaten, being tortured, or even being killed is high. And yet they're still engaged in this profession because they know the importance of information, the importance of people needing to know. Now, here's what I say in reference to the military governments, right? And I won't call them military government, just call them the governments.
Yeah,
governments. Because when I say military government, some people get the impression that it means they're any worse than the civilian governments, you see? When in fact, they seem to have adopted an agenda that civilian governments were not willing to undertake, particularly in Mali, in Burkina Faso, and Niger, which is to end French neocolonial dominance over their politics and over their economics, correct? I would remind them of Thomas Sankara, because all of them, they're always invoking his name, correct?
Yeah, true.
And of course, Thomas Sankara's boots are very large. It's very difficult for any one of them to fit even into one of his boots, you see? But Thomas Sankara was very supportive of independent journalism. Remember when he was Minister of Information?
Yep.
In the previous governments, before he actually became president, he was Minister of Information.
Yeah.
And he charged journalists, he said, if you know of any minister, any senior official involved in corruption, print the story, put it on the radio, put it on national TV. Initially, they did not because they thought it was a trap.
Yeah. Because
they thought it was a trap.
Yeah.
Because that's how the civilian government had operated. And this was a civilian government that he was the Minister of Information for. He thought he wanted to weed them out and have them arrested. But then they started dropping small stories of corruption. And there was no retaliation.
That's when they knew he was serious about it. Yeah.
And then they became aggressive going after corruption. This is Thomas Sankara, the same soldier, the same officer who then became head of state. In fact, you know where the pressure was coming from, right?
Was coming from
his
France.
Colleagues in government, other ministers, saying, wait a minute, Sankara, what are you doing? You're making us look bad to the people. He said, no, I'm not. You are. Stop stealing, and there'll be no story about you.
There'll be no story about you.
You see? So you can't say you want to emulate Sankara and just emulate aspects of Sankara that you find convenient to your agenda. Sankara believed in airing these stories out, informing the people, educating the people, raising their consciousness. And that is why all of them are invoking his name today, because of what he was made, a legacy was able to leave. So if you want to leave a similar legacy, it has to include not only tolerating, but actually promoting. He pushed them to do their work. So rather than harassing them, locking them up, and what have you, you should actually be promoting it. This is the new flowering that we need in Africa. I think our brothers in Senegal may have
Yep.
a better chance to do that. They seem to be at a higher level of consciousness.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
the rulers in Mali,
Burkina Faso,
and Niger, they should look very carefully. I think Senegal is going to surprise us.
Yeah, I think so. And also, just to add a side issue, there's an element to that story that was a bit, for me, hypocritical, in the sense that that was the same week when Israel excused Al Jazeera from, what's it called? From its press duties in Tel Aviv.
Yeah, they were expelled.
Yeah,
they were banned.
And also,
and only, what is it, yesterday, they seized the equipment, AP equipment.
Yep.
And the White House has always said
it was being used to
concerned, That's the strongest language they ever used when it comes to Israel. We are concerned.
We're concerned, yeah.
Oh, no, actually, one time I saw very concerned.
Well, that's upping the ante, You can't use despots. You can't use strong terminology.
We might even see very, very concerned. And then we might see extremely concerned.
I mean, so again, if you juxtapose that story with the reporting of the encampments, how the story has been spun out of.
Thank you.
Thank you for that.
No, that's the best analogy. I'm glad you brought that up. You're destroying their hypocrisy, or rather adding it, in a big and major way. That's the best example, actually.
Because, I mean,
they were.
When I saw the story, I just started laughing. I'm like, this is canon fodder.
Everybody, according to some of these corporate media, everyone who was there protesting in favor of ending the war, in favor of a ceasefire, in favor of ending the genocide, was a Hamas supporter or anti-Semitic. Completely preposterous.
I mean, it's...
And now you go lecturing to these folks in West Africa.
There you go.
The African saying, right? Yeah, they where you warn the baboon not to laugh at the rear end of another baboon, because they can't see their own.
And it's laughable. It's laughable.
It's crazy. Look at the number of journalists that have been killed. They're differently targeted by the Israeli authorities. And you're still pretending that there's no genocide ongoing.
I mean, which actually segues right into the next story, talk of targeted killing, extermination, and what have you. In the course of the week, following the case brought by South Africa against the state of Israel with regards to his actions in Gaza and, by extension, the West Bank, but focusing on Gaza, the ICC chief prosecutor Karim Khan, brought case for arrest warrants to be issued to 2 leaders of the Israeli government and 2 leaders from Hamas. No, 3 leaders from the Israeli government and 3 from Hamas. Now the question is, it wasn't so much as him announcing, it was the pushback that came. And let him say it himself. There is, bear me a second. Where is he?
Program. Thank you for having me. And of course, we're here at the ICC. You are today announcing that you are applying for arrest warrants for top military and political leadership in the Israel-Gaza war since the October 7th events. I'm going to read you some heavy criticism that you've received from the United States. As we know, the United States is not a party to the ICC, nor is Israel. Recently, when word came out that this may be happening at some point, U.S. senators and U.S. congresspeople, mostly Republicans, wrote you a letter signed by Senator Tom Cotton, Mitch McConnell, Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, and others. This is the quote: "Target Israel and we will target you. If you move forward with the measures indicated in the report, we will move to end all American support for the ICC, sanction your employees and associates, and bar you and your families from the United States. You have been warned." Is that a threat?
I think that's the plain meaning of it in English. But there's hotheads everywhere, and there's people that are mature statesmen and stateswomen and leaders. There are those that have fidelity to something greater than themselves, whether it's their constitutions, but ultimately it's the rule of law. The good news is, I think, for the last 2.5 years, we've had very positive engagement with the Biden administration in the United States. We're working across a range of situations, whether it's in Ukraine or Darfur. And I've said to distinguished members on the Hill and to the administration that Rome Statute values are quintessential American values. It's against bullying. It's against the untrammeled power against the most vulnerable. It's the rights, the dignity of the individual. It's the protection of babies. These are fundamental American values that should engender bipartisan support. Now, of course, this situation, unfortunately, lies on the San Andreas fault of international politics and strategic interests. And of course, I've had some elected leaders speak to me and be very blunt. This court is built for Africa and for thugs like Putin, was what one senior leader told me. We don't view it like that. This court is the legacy of Nuremberg. This court is a sad indictment of humanity. This court should be the triumph of law over power and brute force. Grab what you can, take what you want, do what you will. And we're going to simply we're not going to be dissuaded by threats or any other activities, because in the end, we have to fulfill our responsibilities as prosecutors, as the men and women of the office, as judges, as the registry, to something bigger than ourselves, which is the fidelity to justice. And we're not going to be swayed by the different types of threats, some of which are public and some maybe are not.
You mentioned, without names, that there are many who have been indicted who are not in democratic states, who are essentially despots. Israel is a democracy. They have a judiciary, they have law enforcement, they have elected leaders.
Your thoughts, please.
No, actually, I like what he did, because this will then put this court to test, and it will either come out stronger or it would end this process. But here's the deal, actually. Many European countries, as you know, they relate much more so to the ICC as well as the ICJ.
True.
And the simple reason is that they saw and felt the destruction of World War II and World War I. The United States, none of the battles was fought in continental United States of America.
True.
So they have a rather detached view and perspective toward the institutions such as the ICJ and ICC, and really think, okay, we can just use this to, bully people in African countries. And then when it's a European, like Putin, who does not sit on the table with us, we can also then use the court. We can use it politically selectively, right?
Yeah.
But you are not to touch any one of our own, right?
Yeah.
So when she says, Israel is a democracy, what does that really mean in substance? What does it mean When one demented war criminal can be dropping fire on mostly women and children, destroy completely the infrastructure in Gaza, which is a war crime, of course, let alone the killing of the human beings, depriving them of medical care and food, destroying hospitals, targeting journalists, targeting rescue workers. Think about that.
Yep.
Well, if that's a democracy, give me something else. I don't want that democracy. So even that comment by Amanpour is completely foolish and inappropriate in this kind of, circumstance. So what was your point? That people in democracies do not commit war crimes? Preposterous. And now there's another reason, of course, why the U.S. is being so vehement in its, at least some of those senators mentioned, why they're being very harsh toward Karim Khan and the ICC. Because they also fear a day when they have another U.S. engagement of similar stature in a place like Afghanistan, a place like Iraq, and were it not that they already have nuclear weapons, we could say Iran, right?
True.
Where down the line, you could see a scenario where U.S. political and military leaders might also face the possibility of indictment for war crimes. So that's essentially what they're saying. By touching Israel, you're touching us.
Touching us, yeah.
And that's a no-go zone. You can't bite the hand that feeds you. That's why we'll block you from coming to our country.
Block your resources.
We'll starve resources, from you. And a lot of these guys are not fully in tune with how the international community works. Biden, of course, would not use similar language like that. Yeah. He's been around the world and knows how the world, operates as well, and knows how important these institutions are to European countries, who would continue to support them. More and more European countries are now recognizing the state of Palestine.
Yep.
Right? And all they know is bullying and threats. Bullying is threat. Was it with 3 countries, European countries?
It was Ireland,
Spain,
Norway, and Spain today.
Recognized today.
Yeah.
And Israel is going around saying, "Oh, we will never forget this. This isn't the end of it." Some preposterous threats like that. So what? You're going to start bombing them too? So we are living in very interesting times. Very interesting times. And a lot of this, of course, goes back to South Africa. And South Africa, when it filed that lawsuit at the International Court of Justice on December 29, 2023, it started a lot of the process. It inspired even larger size global protest.
Yep.
Because the hearing
Echoes
and the court case was
echoes
beamed
of the
all
past.
over the world. And they made a case for genocide very strongly, with some of the brilliant lawyers on display, Yeah, and it really changed the momentum. The size of the protests became larger. Others were inspired to step forward, including students. Now we see a wave of this recognition. Things will never go backward again.
Of course.
Netanyahu is history.
Of course.
The Minister of Defense, history. Even within Israel, you see the size of the protest against Netanyahu himself.
Yes.
They're realizing that this cannot be the solution. Not the solution that Netanyahu is advocating.
I mean,
and
he's
opposed
in,
to a Palestinian state. In
yeah.
fact,
I mean, he's in a new,
emboldened Hamas. He empowered Hamas, just like the U.S. empowered the Mujahideen
yep,
in
back in the
Afghanistan,
80s. Yeah, in the 80s.
right?
Yeah.
And then empowered Al Qaeda
Yeah.
when the common enemy was still the Soviet Union. But once that ended,
you're going into history now.
no, really. Now, once that ended, they started looking for other targets, including the United States.
And for those who want in-depth element of that history, you could read Unholy Wars by John K. Cooley. Unholy Wars by John K. Cooley. It goes, basically, it's borrowing off the CIA archives. Yeah. And the guy does a brilliant expose. So the book again is Unholy Wars by John K. Cooley.
Yeah. Today I gave, because as you know, I teach at John Jay College. And this semester I also taught one class at Queens College, which is also part of the City University of New York system. So through the years, my students have said wonderful things, either during the semester or at the end. Today, the last young lady who finished her exam and handed her exam in, the professor, I cannot tell you how grateful I am that I was your student this semester.
Bless.
Last night, I got in an argument with my family members. This is a European American who are completely clueless when it comes to African history. I had to correct them several times. And I quoted from some of the assignments from this semester. I even pulled out my phone because I have my notes there. Okay. And I quoted from that. Because when they were talking all this nonsense, before I really started challenging, because normally I don't challenge family, but I just couldn't stand it anymore. I kept telling myself, and this is what she said. I kept telling myself, what would Professor Allimadi say? And then I just couldn't stop myself anymore. Man, the young lady almost made me cry, man. I said, go out and spread the word. And that is the purpose of learning and education. Not just
that once you know, you can't unknow.
I told her this is the best story I've heard. And I hope you keep challenging other people when you hear them talking nonsense.
Yeah. I mean, the notion that in this day and age, when Google is your friend, you've got streams, you've got reams and reams of books that have been written about the subject in which you're interested. And yet, to do the basic thing, which is even open the book and just look at the book of contents and then decide whether it's one for you or not. People don't do that. But who was it that said, there was something one of my friends posted. Yeah. He said, people would argue to defend their ignorance to the point of...
Absolutely.
I said,
amazing.
Wow, that is wild. That is wild. Again, thank you very much for coming through.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Conrad.
It's
it's the greatest thing you can have is impart some analysis, some education while enjoying yourself while doing it too.
Yeah,
you can't get any better than that.
Of course. I mean,
so it's always my pleasure. I'm at your beck and call.
Oh, thank you.
And let's continue the conversation.
Thank you. And as we'll say on this side of the fence, it's been brilliant. And again, thank you for coming through. And until next week, when we return with some other stories, good night. Enjoy the rest of your week.